Thanks for joining today's webinar. This is the RhoMobile Weekly Webinar Series. I am your host, Rob Galvin, so thanks for joining today. I will also be your presenter for today. So today we have a topic around performance. We've done a couple of webinars on performance in the past few weeks. We've had some blog posts on performance. Today we're going to continue that trend and talk about particularly front-end UI optimization. So I'll get to that in a minute and what we're going to cover in the topic. I'm also, of course, going to give you an update on where we're going with the webinar series and what's coming up next week. And then we'll finish up the webinar with a resource of the week. Again, just some housekeeping. If you've been on these webinars before, ask your questions via GoToMeeting. I am recording this session. And then please give me feedback. When you leave the webinar, there's a couple of questions. One of them is, tell me what you want to see in the upcoming webinars, and please give me some suggestions. We definitely don't have a shortage of topics, but want to make sure that the topics that we are presenting are meeting the needs of the community. Okay? I don't think today's webinar will go a full hour, but if it does, that's fine. We are recording it, and if you need to leave, you can watch the replay. The next topic that we're going to talk about next week has to do with just your developer experience using our IDE, RhoStudio. Over the past few weeks, we've been focusing on applications, whether it's RhoMobile applications, RhoConnect applications, and we haven't really done anything about using our IDE, and we still have a lot of people that are just new to our environment. So I'll be spending some time next week and actually how to take RhoStudio and use some external tools and really increase your productivity. So even if you're a RhoStudio user, I'm going to jump into some other tools that really complement the experience with RhoStudio. And at the end of the day, you'll effectively be able to code a lot quicker in our environment and thus create applications a lot faster. If you missed last week's webinar, I covered how to use RhoMobile and how to use your code for the mobile platforms and port those to Windows 32. So why would you want to do this? Maybe you have scenarios where a user is partially mobile, maybe a manager that needs to be sitting behind a desk most of the time, but also goes into the back of the warehouse. Hey, why don't you use the same code that you put on the mobile device on the desktop? So I walked through how to do that and how to do it using RhoHub. So you kind of get a little bit of a taste of building for Windows 32, but also using RhoHub to actually execute that build. We've done about 5 webinars since we've kicked off this webinar series. Definitely check them out on Launchpad. There's the URL. There's the QR code for last week's webinar. If you want to watch the replay, they're up on YouTube, and we have them posted inside of the Launchpad developer community. As always, if you're on the webinar, we're looking for guest speakers, so reach out to me. There's my email address. You don't have to be something where you're actually promoting one of your wares, but if you want to contribute to the community as well, there's some opportunity to do so. So please reach out to me on that one. Okay, so let's jump right into the topic of the day. Okay, it's about performance, and I've been involved in a team over the past few months, I guess, that has been focused on performance. We've been helping a lot of customers out, not a lot of customers, but some key customers that have experienced some performance issues, and I've been involved in those along with Darren Campbell, who's leading the team, and for the most part, we've seen performance issues kind of fall into a couple of different buckets, right? Whether it's network caching, if it was actually a web application and they were using our runtime client to just connect to that, or some things that have to do with network caching. Then, there's some issues around page structure. So how is the page defined? What's the layout of the page? What are the different elements on the actual pages and views? And that's another area that could cause performance bottlenecks. The other area that tends to come up is around JavaScript, right? So processing JavaScript, and what you're actually doing to manipulate the page. And then a lot of the issues have come down to some rendering techniques and tactics, right? And that's what I'm going to focus on today. The other piece, which we really haven't covered, which we will be covering in an upcoming webinar, is data handling. So, how are you? We've seen cases where customers are, seeding the local ROM database, and they're just really not doing it the best way, right? Or when they're retrieving data from the models and they want to, show a list, they're not using pagination and other techniques. So we really haven't covered the data handling. But today, I'm going to focus just on these kind of front-end, what I call rendering aspects that affect performance. And we kind of take those for granted traditionally in a browser-based environment. So I'm going to focus on kind of two areas. The first area has to do with repaints and reflows, right? Doesn't really come up that much, but there's a lot of stuff going on when you're just trying to render a page, right? Whether it's simple or what, it doesn't matter. There's a lot of things that are happening. So I'm going to, first kind of dive into that. What are the reflows? What are repainting? What does this mean? How do you, what are some of the things that affect it? And then, how to avoid them, right? What are some of the techniques and things you can do to detect them and also to avoid repaints and reflows, and because they are quite costly, particularly on a mobile device. And then the next area we're going to cover is some CSS3 attributes. There's different, ways to render your UI, and some of these CSS attributes are more processor intensive than others. So I'm going to explore in really just kind of a simple application that I whipped up, how to detect these and how you can identify where these potential problems are. Okay, so those are kind of the two areas we're going to cover. All right, let's just talk a little bit about the render process for a minute. Like I said in the beginning, I think we take for granted, we use the web all day long, browsing websites for work, for personal reasons, what have you, and the pages just come up, and we're used to this on our phones now, and there's a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes just to paint the screen, right? So if we talk about the render process, there's kind of like two things that are affecting it, and this is really important to understand because this is going on all the time, right, when we're using our application. It's constantly rendering. So first of all, we have the HTML tags that are effectively defining the document structure, the DOM tree. I think we all know what the DOM tree is, and that's your page layout, right? Then we have our style sheets, our user agent defaults, and the combination of these two effectively produce this render tree, right? So the render tree is what's visible. So you may have elements in your DOM which are maybe hidden, right, display none, and those aren't on the render tree. The render tree is really just what is visually there, right? So once the browser or the the rendering engine kind of pieces all of this together, it then paints it to the screen, and that's effectively what you see, right? So it is a tree, right? So that's a very important concept that you understand. So understand this process and how it actually gets to painting your application. So in order to kind of see what I'm talking about here, I just want to play this video. This video's been around for some time. You may have seen it. I actually didn't come across it until when we first started these performance tasks, and I thought it was quite interesting to see. So just let me play this, and I'm going to pause it at a certain point. So this is let me just replay here. So this is a visualization that is on Gecko Firefox, and effectively what it's doing, and this may not be coming across on the webinar, but let me just pause it for a second. Effectively what it's doing is it's showing when the page is being loaded how the different pieces of the page are being rendered, right? So you see these kind of boxes appear, and this is all the elements of the HTML markup and how it's actually going in and painting. So the page isn't quite done painting yet. So let me just continue, and you can see the different pieces, different sections of the UI, and then we kind of get to like here, pretty much, and it looks like the page is kind of fully constructed, right? You have your header, you have some sections of content, you have your footer, so you kind of think like, hey, the page is done. I should see the page now, right? But then something happens, right? Something happens, and then it actually has to repaint a lot of the stuff that it already repainted. And it's repainting, and it's re-putting them back into positions. And you're sitting there saying, well, why did it do that? Something triggered this rendering engine to kind of repaint and redraw sections, and that's what we'll call them reflows, right? And that is very costly. We don't really notice that on our desktops. It's very costly for a mobile device to do reflows. So you can't fully avoid them, but you could not trigger them when they don't need to be triggered, and that's what we're going to talk about, right? So that's kind of the gist of this conversation is taking a look at our applications and trying to avoid that scenario where page. Okay. Yeah, I think we're still connected. Sorry, I got a message saying I was disconnected. Okay, so yeah, so it builds this page, and really, think about a tree. Anything that affects either the DOM or the styles or positions, anything that affects what it uses to construct a tree is possibly going to cause a reflow, right? It has to analyze this, right? So things like adding, removing DOM elements, of course, the rendering engine needs to say, oh, okay, I need to paint a new div tag, right? Hiding things will also cause it because now it has to adjust for moving things up in the render tree. And then, of course, if you're animating things, right? So even just simply having a spinner kind of loading spinner over elements, right? Even if it's an animated GIF, right? It potentially has to, repaint the things that are underneath it because it's being affected, right? And then you'll see in some of the examples, code examples that we're going to walk through that actually styles, right? Either adding styles, tweaking them programmatically in JavaScript, that it will cause a reflow. And then, in the desktop world, if you're resizing your browser, that's going to trigger it. But of course, we don't have that on mobile. But you do have orientation change, so that will also cause a reflow. All right, so here are some of the elements that would trigger it, right? And this isn't a comprehensive list, and some of them are quite obvious, like anything that affects geometry, or when I say geometry, I'm talking about the page layout and the structure of the page. So when you're talking about positions, right, like client left, offset, offset top, those are the things that, of course, would probably be pretty obvious that it would cause a reflow. But then some of them on your list are like, why is that? Like focus. Setting to focus to an element, why would that trigger a reflow, right? Or if you do things like inner text, right? You want to grab the text inside of a div tag, and you call inner text, that actually causes a reflow. Where inner HTML, which may do the same thing, doesn't, right? So here's some of the things that you can particularly pay attention to and look for. And I'm not saying don't use these. You definitely you probably need to use these in some cases, but there may be alternatives, and you'll see as we go through some of the code that you may want to pay careful attention to actually when you use them, how often you use them. Okay. All right. So like I said, some of these reflows you just can't avoid, right? You can't avoid them. They are expensive, right? And some of them are more expensive than others, right? So think about like I said before, this is a render tree, right? You do need to manipulate your pages, but you just be careful. If you're touching things in certain areas of the tree, right? Let's say you're touching things very up above. The render engine has to, let's say you're touching a div tag that's, kind of close to the top of the tree or the root of the tree, and now you've invalidated it. Now the rendering engine has to go through and actually rebuild and reanalyze everything below it. So, in some cases, if you can avoid that whole tree shakeup, definitely do it, right? Every time it has to reflow, it's more processing consumption. And on mobile, that's not good, right? You're going to see, lagginess in your application. It's not going to be smooth. And then, oh, by the way, you're going to make the device run out of battery a lot sooner than it really needs to, right? So just, be careful. That's kind of just a general rule of thumb as we're looking at this. All right, so let's go through some examples, right? So we talked about before, I think, when you're looking at some of the styles, setting them may be kind of intuitive, right? Let's say you wanted to set the position of a div tag. You wanted to set, the left pixel position of it. You kind of think that that's going to cause a reflow. But did you know that actually just referencing the styles causes a reflow? So here's two simple functions that do the same exact thing, right? And the first one, the paint slow, it actually is, this is just some jQuery syntax, but it's setting a variable to get the left attribute of a div tag, and then it's setting another div tag to be the same. So we're kind of like aligning the components on the screen. So in the first case, we're kind of, setting, getting a value, setting one, then getting another value, and then setting another one. And this other way that we do it is we do our gets before the sets. So we're doing both of our gets here, and then we're setting them. And you're going to see, and I'm going to show you this in RhoStudio, but we're actually, in this case, in the paint slow case, we're actually recalculating the style twice. Why? Because we actually referenced a attribute, and then we set it, and then when we referenced it again, it had to, because we referenced another one, it had to recalculate all these styles again. And in this case, we're actually saving the recalculation. So this is a very simple example, but if you're doing a lot of this stuff, it definitely adds up. So this just simple kind of tactic could avoid recalculation. So I just want to show that in RhoStudio because some people don't realize that we have some of these tools where you can see. So we're just going to run that simple page and this reflow demo. Okay, so here we have RhoSimulator launched on the left-hand side, very each, and then we have our web inspector on the right-hand side. And I'm going to jump to the timeline view. A lot of people are probably familiar with this, so we'll go through this pretty quick. And I'm just going to record what's going on here. You can see when I put my mouse over here that things happen, right? So I'm going to click slow. This is executing our slow function, and then executing our fast function. And then we'll just stop the recording for a second. You can see some of these things happen, but I want to pinpoint here, the event click on the slow actually caused 2 recalculations of the style, and then this fast one here just caused the 1, right? So when you're doing this, timeline feature is quite useful, and when you see a lot of these recalculate styles, it's definitely something to watch for. And then, of course, if it takes a long time, then you want to make sure that you look at those areas. And apologize. Let me just exit out of here. All right. Okay. So so that was that quick example. Let's jump back to the presentation. All right, so while we're on the topic of styles, here's another thing that people tend to, fall prey to, and that's when they're actually changing styles. So here's here's a small snippet of some code, and I'm going through and I'm actually, changing the left and top, styles for particular elements, and I'm doing it kind of one by one. So every time, like I said before, we are setting the style, it needs to, kind of recalculate, reflow, and rebuild the render tree. A better way to do it would be to actually just, set it to a class name. So this does it in one shot. It doesn't have to do it iteratively, okay? So that's a good way. Now, in some cases, you may actually be doing dynamic styles, depending on different scenarios. You can accomplish some of that in media queries, so I'm not really covering that topic here, but that's one way you can do it, where you can have multiple kind of classes, dynamically, if you will. But sometimes it's in your JavaScript. And, so in this case, I'm setting it all in one sweep here instead of line by line. So this is just a simple example, but something that you want to make sure that you don't do. All right, so another thing is, okay, what if you need to reference styles in a loop, right? So you're going through a big loop, and you want to reference things. Like I said, just referencing the styles are causing the reflow trigger to happen. So if you can, pull those gets out of the loop, assign them to a variable up above, and then just reference the variable inside of your loop, right? So these are just these little small things that definitely add up over time, okay? All right, so now let's talk about another technique for actually, changing the DOM. I call it offline, right? So remember, in the previous examples, we manipulated the DOM, and every time we do that, it causes the render tree to reflow. So one way you can do it is actually, if you need to, and this is quite useful for when you want to perform a lot of operations, right? So maybe there's a lot of styles you need to apply, or maybe you have a lot of components you need to, to adjust. So what you can do is you can take that DOM node and actually clone it, right? So you use this clone node routine, and you're basically assigning a node, right? So you're taking a copy of the node, and then you do all your massive changes that you want to that clone version of the node, and then you just replace the one that's on the DOM with the new formatted structure, right? So yeah, you will still incur a reflow for putting the new one on, but if you're doing a lot of operations, 20, 50 operations on that node, you don't want to do those iteratively on the live DOM node. Do it in the clone, and then just replace the DOM node so you just have that one hit instead of 20. Here's the same exact thing, but done using jQuery. So jQuery has some nice features for doing cloning and replacing. So if you haven't looked into those methods with jQuery Mobile or jQuery, then look at those. Those are definitely useful. All right, so here's another way of kind of like offline DOM manipulation. So a bad way is, let's say you're building a form dynamically. You have an input array of the names of the input fields that you want to populate the form with, right? So one thing you might do is go through each and then append to the form this new input container, right? Input control. That's a bad way. Like I said, every time you add things to the DOM, it's going to trigger that reflow. So a better way to do it might be, and this is using jQuery syntax again, is to take the node. It's similar to the other one. It's just done a different way that we just went over. Take the node off the DOM. So we're doing down here, we're saying, okay, let's get the form. So we're taking the form, and we're basically removing it from the DOM. And then we're adding all the input attributes and controls to that form, and then we're appending it to the form. So it's very similar to the previous example, but just done a different way. Instead of cloning, we're actually removing it and putting it back on. So you might want to look at these two techniques for kind of manipulating the DOM offline. All right. So now I want to jump into some CSS3 things that would affect performance. So we talked about, some techniques for DOM manipulation and that's all. But what about actual content on the page? So I'm going to jump to my live example here, and let me close RhoSimulator. So I have a simple page here, and actually we can see it in the slides a little better. This is a simple page. It's just a list view, okay? And it's not doing anything over the network, so let me just run the application. I'm going to do the scroll test, and I'll provide this page after the webinar. So here we're just launching in RhoSimulator, and it's really just a simple application. It's just a list. And I'm using, in this case, I'm actually using the same picture and the same name. So in reality, these would be different faces, you know, and this is kind of typical that we see in applications. So just kind of a list, right? Not a very long list. I think there's maybe 20 items here or so. But, and you really can't see this on the webinar too well, but when I'm just scrolling here, it's not, and this is on my desktop, right? It's not very super quick, right? There's some lagginess to it. Like, it's not super fluid, okay? So think about how this would look on a mobile device. It's even more laggy, particularly a device that doesn't have a GPU, a graphics accelerator. So this may look fine, and you know, but I want to show you some ways we can actually detect CSS3 attributes that are more process intensive, and how you can avoid them. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use RhoSimulator for a second. And now this is a static page, right? There's nothing else going on. It's not pulling anything. You know, it's not doing anything. This content is already loaded. This is just scrolling, right? So I'm showing this because sometimes you have applications that I'm sure you have scrolling applications, and then you may also have applications where you're actually just, you know, changing the view, but you know, it's not a full page reload. So this would apply to you. So again, I'm going to use the timeline tool here, and I'm going to record, and I'm just going to scroll down, right? So you can see here that we have a lot of painting, and of course it has to repaint because we're displaying new elements, right? Now, the Web Inspector is good in RhoSimulator for a lot of different things, but in some cases you may actually need to use other tools, right? And I'm going to show you how to do that. The first thing, and I covered this a little bit in a previous webinar, but for those of you who didn't attend, I'm actually going to use one of my favorite tools is Google Chrome developer tools. They're constantly adding new things to the developer tools that are quite useful. And if you're a developer, I think you probably need to use any tool you can come across to make your life a lot easier. And in some cases, this seems to fit the bill. So how did I do that? Let me just show you in RhoStudio. In my application, I am going into, let me pull up the right one here. I'm going into rhoconfig.txt, and I'm going to look for the local server. Okay, this is normally commented by default. Let me highlight this so everybody can see. So here's the local server port. As you know, RhoMobile Applications is effectively a mini web server that's serving up your local views. So now that I know the local, if I have this commented, it will dynamically pick a number, and you won't know unless you look at the log file. So to make your life easier, just uncomment that out, and then once it's uncommented, I can just pull up my local host, port 8080, and then here's kind of the path to your application. So I'm just pulling up my default page here. So I just have everything on a single page. Okay. So now let's look at the Chrome developer tools. Okay, so I did Control-Shift-I. You can get to it from the menu. And I'm going to use the timeline. You can see there's a lot of similar things here, but their timeline is a little bit better. They actually have this concept of frames. So let's do the same thing. We're going to record, and then we're just going to scroll right down the page. And then I'm going to stop. Let's take a look at a couple things here. This section up above shows you the frame performance, okay? Two things you want to pay attention to. There's a little, it's hard, I don't know why they make it so hard to read, but there's two lines here. One says 30 FPS and the other says 60 FPS. FPS is frames per second. Okay, so it's kind of inverse, right? The higher the bar, the less frames per second you're getting. Okay, for a very responsive application, like you don't notice any lag, you want to be 60 frames per second or better, right? So you definitely want to make sure that these bars go below this 60 frames per second line. And you can see that a lot of the frames of these are rendering frames when the browser is actually painting are quite high, and it's actually, you know, we're scrolling here, so the whole bar here is filled with a paint pretty much, right? And that's all it's doing. It's not doing any JavaScript. In your case, you may see different things, but anyway, let's kind of take a look at some of these. So we can see that some of them 35 milliseconds, 31 milliseconds just to paint that frame. So that's quite heavy, right? On my desktop here, it may not seem that bad, and I'm not sure how it's come across on the webinar, but on a mobile device, you will definitely notice this, and it'll appear laggy. So let's play with this and say, okay, now I have this application. My users are reporting that this list really blows, and you know, they think it's terrible. So now let's figure out how to fix this. So, and this is what I'm going to go through next. Is really not an exact science, but it's something I think that you can look at to pinpoint possible areas. So let's play with a couple things. The first thing I'm going to play with is maybe this background here, which is like this wood grain background. I don't know. Maybe that's causing some problems. So I'm gonna click on the magnifying glass, and I'm just going to select the body there, and let's just get rid of the background, right? So here's another nice thing you can do in our web inspector as well, but is just remove some of the styles. So now that I have the style, the background removed, yeah, of course, this is a different UI, but again, we're just kind of playing around and seeing what's causing the problem. So let's do another recording of the timeline. Let me clear it out. Let me do the same exact test. I'm going to scroll to the top. I am going to record, and I'm just going to scroll down again. Okay, so you can see, I think that, let's stop the recording. We have, we're still not exactly below the 60 frames per second. It did get better, right? Let's take a look at some of these. We don't have as many tall bars. We actually have a lot that are almost at the 30 frames per second or lower, right? And let's just look at some of these. I'll hover over them. So we're down to 9 milliseconds on that one, 6 milliseconds, 7, etc. So, so yeah, it's better, but I kind of like that background. Let's look for other opportunities to improve things. So let me go back, and we're going to put that background back because I like the wood green. And I'm going to look at some of these. I'm going to look at the actual list because the background's not moving, right? Anything that's actually moving is probably the area I should look at first, right? So the background is rendered. Yeah, this is flying over the background, so this content will need to be repainted. But the thing that's actually moving quite a bit is this list, right? So let's inspect that list and play around with that guy. All right, so we selected the list, and I'm going to just take a look at the CSS on it. All right, so let's try getting rid of, I don't know, we'll do the box shadow. So let me do that again, real slow. The box shadow is really not too visible on this application anyway, and I got to imagine on the small device, it's probably even less visible. So let me just remove that, and let's do another recording. I'm going to clear that out, kind of reset everything so we're doing the right test here. Click record, and we're going to scroll down, and we're going to stop. And so, wow, so you can actually see that a majority of the frames are below, which is better, it's a good thing, below the 60 frames per second target here. So we're actually doing better than we wanted to, right? So let's take a look at some of those. That one was long, 13. So even though some of these may take longer, the responsiveness of the application will be a lot better because we're actually doing quicker frames per second, right? So so now, and I can continue doing this for a while. So the point here is, to actually come in here and take a look at the elements and, really play around and see, what makes sense. Like here's another one, right? Let me look at this guy. I don't really like the way this icon's coming out anyway, but let me inspect that. So we have another box shadow here. So I already know that box shadows are killer, so I'm going to get rid of that box shadow. And also, hey, it looks like this text has some shadowing as well. So I'm going to highlight the text. And where's my, actually I didn't highlight the text. Oh, this is in jQuery, right? So here's some text shadows, item container. Let's turn that off. It really is not quite different to have these text shadows. But anyway, let's just do another quick, and I know kind of beating a dead horse here, but just wanted you to see this. And this is a technique that you can use to really kind of optimize the performance. So let's do another recording. And let's stop the recording. Again, most of them, I don't know what happened here, but most of them are below the 60 frames per second. We kind of take a look at some of them. You can see that they're roughly the same, right? So again, just, this is where we want to kind of shoot for different things that are going to, to have this. Every time you're painting and doing a paint operation here, the processor is involved, and particularly on devices that don't have a GPU, like our Windows Mobile platform, this is going to be a hit, right? So you want to avoid this, and you want to make sure that your application looks nice and is a lot smoother. So if I did the same test before on my desktop here, just kind of scrolling really quick, it seems a lot more fluid and snappy to me. Okay, so there's just some techniques. So let's jump back to the slides. So let's talk about some of the kind of usual subjects or suspects. I don't know why I had subjects. Suspects here in our who's guilty on the CSS, right? So RGBA, right, as one of the attributes I did not turn off in the application. That's this box here has RGBA where it's transparent. It's going to be transparent, so give that nice kind of look, right? And that's the RGBA CSS3 attribute. And this last parameter here is how transparent that particular element is. So one thing I could say about that is it definitely makes your application look nicer, but I think you want to avoid layering them. So there was one case where I was helping a customer, and they had a basic page that had some transparency in it on its elements, which was fine. But then every time they wanted to do an operation, make a web service call, they would throw up a loading GIF, right, an animated spinner. And the animated spinner had put a full screen, kind of like half white or gray, background. So it basically looked like it was disabled. The application was disabled. So now we had like 4 layers of RGBA values on top of each other, and then we had this like big spinner, which also had some shadowing going on top of that, and just the animated GIF was, causing the processor to kind of like figure out, down through all the layers, what it should actually paint pixel by pixel. And, there's some other ways you could have done the same thing without having that hit on the processor and still have a kind of nice visual appeal. So just be careful of RGBA and kind of layering on top of each other. Okay. Box shadow, I've found finding that the box shadow is like a humongous hit across the board, right? So I would avoid it if you can. Think about the shadowing on the mobile screen and how small it is. Is it really, really, really necessary? If you really, really need it, I would suggest that you either make sure it's not on a moving element, right? It's something that's static. And then also the blur radius, right, which is this these values here, maybe reduce those. Don't make them so huge. So look at that. Again, anything that's moving is like big target number one. And then take a look at what's inside of that piece. And box shadow is definitely, and likewise, text shadowing as well is another typical guilty party. Sometimes, like, jQuery Mobile, I see has it on by default in a lot of the themes. And like half the time I forget it's there because it's so, not super duper, visible, right? That turning it off is probably just fine. So do that. And if you're using jQuery Mobile, they have this theme roller that you can go in and you can actually, build your own themes, even rebuild the, the existing ones, the ABCD ones, and just turn off these elements, drop shadow, box shadow. You can go into the theme roller and just, make those 0 or disable them. And then, you'll definitely have something that performs better. So same type of, suggestion for text shadowing. Rounded corners is kind of like a surprise one. So rounded corners has been around for a while. It makes it really nice to kind of, define buttons and containers without having to have your Photoshop guy, develop these graphics. We used to do all these different techniques, and it's really quite nice when you want to build responsive layouts because, you want to adapt to the screen size, and it's really a lot easier than graphics. It is, and I use it all the time. It's definitely valuable. The only thing I would say is and the reason why this is a problem is when the rendering engine has to paint an element and it has a rounded corner, it has to calculate for those rounded corners like every single time, right? So, definitely consider using a graphic if you can. You'll also benefit from the graphic being cached, so it doesn't have to really think about it and recalculate. And if it's again on an item that is moving, like in my case where I had that list view and each of those items, the user's names were, that was a CSS3 rounded corner, item there. If you can get rid of the rounded corners and just make it square, it will actually be less processor intensive. And if I actually use the graphic, it would probably be better as well. So these are definitely some of the areas I would look at in terms of CSS3 that I've been finding people are not paying attention to, and they really need to be looked at. And if you want your application snappy, I would focus on this area first in kind of reviewing the CSS3. Okay. Now, I did cover this in the last webinar when I talked about building for Windows Desktop, but yeah, you want to have some of those nice-looking graphics and CSS attributes on, on some of these higher-end devices. So if you're building iOS, you're building, for Android, and it has a GPU, you probably want to have a nice-looking style sheet, that has these shadows and gradients and RGBAs. But Rho, the Rho platform provides a really nice and easy way to kind of get around this. So we have this system.get property, and you want to look at the platform value, and you can, in this case, it's showing Windows Desktop, but it shows the different platforms, and you can include different style sheets. So maybe on Windows Mobile, you probably want to turn off all of these kind of like usual typical suspects of performance killers, and maybe on Android and iOS, you want to include them, right? So, definitely use this to your advantage. And we do this today when you build your application by default using the app generator, but definitely take advantage of it. All right, so in summary, there's definitely a lot of things going on when we're just painting the screen, right? We take it for granted. Think about the things that are actually doing that. Use the tools to take a look at, where's the CPU, where's it being spent in terms of painting, recalculating styles, right? And try to avoid those if you can, right? And there's definitely ways you can do that. And also, like I said, take a look at some of these CSS styles and see if you really, really need them. Try to make some of the trade-offs and, compromise. I know it's a visual thing, but, look at some of these, and there's different ways you can go about doing it. And maybe, maybe you need to tweak some of the parameters, as I mentioned before, in order for you to still get that same look, the basic look, but you want to have that fluidness, that responsiveness to your application. And then, like we just showed, definitely take advantage of these per platform techniques when it comes to delivering different styles to the different platforms. Utilize developer tools. I didn't really go over this in detail. I mean, we talked about hooking in Chrome developer tools. There's some bookmarklets that are quite useful as well. I have this, where is it? DOM Monster is one of them, which has been around for a while, but it's quite nice. Let me pull up an application that I was working on. We kind of tweaked it a bit. This is a customer application. It was something we were targeting for ET1. It's kind of like a restaurant manager. They were kind of managing the inventory, and we wanted to have some useful things on the screen. Let me just cancel out of this stuff here. Right. So there's a lot of things going on in this page, but what I wanted to show you was, if I this DOM Monster widget here is quite nice. It'll actually analyze the page. So just loading the page, launching this widget, there's a lot of red flags here, right? That tells you some more things, and you can look at the JavaScript console in the browser. But here's another useful tool. DOM size is higher than 250K. Element count is excessively high. Nesting deep is very high. So here's just, this is like page structure that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that I didn't really cover too much in this detail, but definitely utilize the developable tools that are out there to help look at your page structure, look at the CSS attributes, record your timelines, and analyze that, okay? So there's just some quick tips on performance from a front-end point of view, and for the most part, particularly on Windows Mobile and CE, being a part of this performance team, I've been seeing that this is where a lot of the customers are experiencing the problems in terms of performance. Is that it could be a combination of things, but definitely make sure your front-end UI selection is going to put you in the best light, right? Okay, so here's my resource of the week, and this is I took a lot of inspiration from this person. This resource in the past, I've given out websites and tools, things like that. This one is a must-follow. So if you're into following people, I've been following this guy for a while now, and took a lot of the inspiration to this presentation. And his name is Paul Irish. This guy works for Google. He's really a front-end UI developer that's involved in a lot of things. He's a developer advocate. I actually recently saw him at the HTML5 Developer Conference, which he always presents, and you can look at some of his past presentations. I took some of the content in this presentation from some of his material. He's involved in a lot of different projects. HTML5 boilerplate is one of his babies that he's involved in. There's kind of a spin-off to that, HTML5 mobile boilerplate, which is more geared towards mobile, so you may want to take a look at that. He's also involved in Modernizer, which kind of helps, and a lot of this stuff is mostly from a typical web type of development, but definitely somebody to follow. He's a great resource, always useful information when it comes to HTML5 and performance and tips and tricks and useful tools. So this is my resource of the week, is to make sure you follow Paul Irish. All right, so now we're down to probably about 10 minutes left. And let me jump out of here so we'll get to some of the questions. And while we're, like I do always, while you guys ask a question, I'm going to ask you to take a look at this poll and give me some information. So the question I'm asking you is, who is defining your CSS files, right? Is this something you're getting from a design team, like the guys that are in Photoshop, or typical designers that are just making it look pretty? Is this coming from your developers who are maybe not so CSS savvy and they're just kind of cobbled together a CSS style sheet? Or is this coming from your developers who are pretty CSS savvy? Or hey, maybe you're just taking something off the web and you're kind of using it as is, right? So let me know. All right, so let's jump into some of the questions. And I know some of them came in as I was presenting. If I'm the presenter, it's a little difficult to answer the questions as they come in as I'm presenting, so I usually save them to the end. So some of these may They have already been answered, but we'll go through them anyway. And then, all right, so let's see. How would it affect performance if we say in an ERB file we include Ruby code, which at times is in, and we'll say for outputting info based on certain logic? Hey, Mark. Yeah, so I guess, you know, the ERB files, the Ruby code is executed as the page is loading, right? And then if you're doing AJAX calls, you know, you're calling back into Ruby. I think what I showed was like really once the page is loaded. So for the most part, like the Ruby is really not affecting performance. That is more, at least the front-end UI performance. The Ruby code, of course, is going to impact things that would prevent the page from loading, blocking things where you're getting data, you're parsing data. We didn't really cover that in this webinar. That's definitely one of the things we want to get to. That's super important. Can too much JavaScript hurt performance? If we overuse jQuery Mobile, would it bloat the app size? Would it affect performance? Yeah, so, you know, JavaScript is another area that could definitely affect performance. I've seen some customers where they're just kind of pulling these JavaScript libraries, you know, off the web. They're not quite sure. They may think they know what it does, but, you know, they probably haven't stepped through the code of that library to see what it really is doing. And is it really optimized for mobile? That's a question to be answered, right? And again, we didn't really kind of explore JavaScript in detail. We did, you know, I think at 2.2 we're introducing these JavaScript performance counters, and we didn't really cover that in this webinar. We're definitely going to walk through that, and I think that will answer that question there. Is there a plugin or tool to see the reflows? Hey, yeah, so that reflow video that I showed before, there's actually, and I'll include this when I post it, there's a link where you can actually build that version of Gecko to point to your own web page and actually see that. So it's there. It's not so much a plugin. There's a little work involved. Browser will not work if you use WebView.navigate. Yeah, so when I use the browser, yeah, so a couple of things about me using Chrome developer tools. Number one, it is a different rendering engine than what we use in RhoSimulator, what we use, you know, on the device. So it's just, you know, it's there as a tool for you to kind of see where some of the big bottlenecks could be and to get an idea of what you need to pay attention to in terms of performance. So, you know, as you're going through, yeah, your application may not work from the browser like I showed, but you could still try to point a URL to a particular method, you know, a model/method, and get to that page, right? Okay, somebody's asking another question. Let's see. Okay, if you're just starting out, how would you set up your development environment? What are the tools you are must-haves? Yeah, you know, I'm going to cover some of this next week. So when I talk about RhoStudio and the IDE, we're going to talk about some of these extra tools that, particularly for the guys who are just getting started, hey, you know, why not use, you know, maybe a different editor for your files that is like the you know, the best thing since sliced bread. People are very passionate about their editors, and hey, how can we incorporate that? So I'm going to cover some of that in next week's webinar. Let me just close the poll and share this with you guys so you can kind of see what's going on. So we kind of have even distribution across the board, where it's coming from designers, not so savvy. You know, 30% is probably more on the cutting edge of doing it the right way, and everybody else is kind of like, yeah, we need some work on CSS. All right, a couple of questions. Single page, Rob, when you write one single page application, do you think the performance is better than in different pages? I guess it depends. Like I said, in the beginning, you saw all the different elements that affect performance. So, you know, of course, everything's going to depend. I think there's definitely some advantages to doing single-page applications. You know, you're avoiding scrolling probably, right? So that affects things. You're, in most cases, doing things on smaller sets of data. So that's always a good thing, right? You don't have this humongous. I mean, you are, you know, adding or removing to the DOM. So there's some impact there, but typically you're doing like small chunks, and you're designing your pages with that thought in mind. So I think generally when you're kind of thinking in that way, it helps you build a better application. So, I would definitely consider that path as a choice. Let's see, this next question has to do with jQuery Mobile. What's different about row elements that impacts performance on Windows Mobile? So again, Windows Mobile, for row elements on Windows Mobile, we added WebKit, which really, by default, enables a lot of these third-party JavaScript libraries to say, hey, I think I'm on, an Android. I think I'm on iOS. And because we enabled WebKit on Windows Mobile, it doesn't mean that, hey, jQuery Mobile, these other libraries know about that, and were designed to run on Windows Mobile. Windows Mobile does not have a GPU, right? So everything that they're doing typically on Android and iOS, animations, transitions, all these CSS3 elements that would run better on a GPU are not being executed that way. So you're already kind of, you need to pay a particular attention to that. So that's kind of why I think some people see right away that, hey, it doesn't look so great on Windows Mobile. You need to look at it and make sure that you're kind of fine-tuning the CSS to make sure it runs better. What are your thoughts on using JQMobi over jQuery Mobile? To be honest, Robert, I haven't really spent a lot of time looking at JQMobi. It's definitely, we had them present not too long ago, and I know there was a question on Launchpad about this and some recent updates from JQMobi. So I need to take a look at it a little bit more. I've heard some really good things about it, so definitely consider it as well. And I think that was the last question, which is very good because we're pretty much at the top of the hour. All right, so hey, listen, everybody, thanks a lot for your time and your participation today. Just so you know, we're averaging about, over 100 people on each of these webinars, and then we're also getting quite a bit of hits online for viewing them. So please continue. Once you leave the webinar, please leave me some suggestions for different things you'd like to see. And we'll see you next time when we take a look at the IDE and some external tools for making your developer life easier. So thanks again for joining today, everybody. That concludes the webinar. Thanks.